Welcome back, 8:39 your time. About a third of American households rent rather than own their residence, and there are certainly advantages to renting, but there can be some pitfalls as well, and that is where our real estate expert and John Adams is in to help us avoid those potential problems. John, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm well.
Let's get right to this.
Okay.
So is there a way for a renter to know in advance who is responsible for what? Is that all spelled out?
Well, absolutely. There's a way for them to know, but typically it's not spelled out, and that's why we need to spell it out. So the answer is the lease. Let's focus on the lease. In a nutshell, Georgia law simply says this: the landlord's responsibility is to make repairs, and the tenant's responsibility is to pay rent. Everything else is pretty much left to the up to the parties to decide what they want to do.
What about a limit? Is there a limit on how much the rent can be?
None whatsoever. And again, that's just negotiated between the parties. And I think the legislature, in their wisdom, decided we're not going to try to tell everybody exactly what their relationship has to be. We're just going to say it has to be habitable, it has to be relatively livable, and the tenant has to pay the rent. Other than that, you're on your own.
So what about repairs? Is the landlord responsible for everything that goes wrong? I'm sure the tenant maybe causes some damage themselves and things like that too.
This is a very vague area. So, for example, if we're talking about something like let's just say a lightning bolt hits the house, okay? That's no one's responsibility.
Right.
Who pays for that? Well, I can guarantee you that the landlord is going to have insurance for the building, but the tenant has a responsibility in most cases to have insurance for their own possessions. That's not talked about. Also, we talk about repairs as opposed to things like maintenance. Most leases say that the tenant is responsible for mowing the lawn or cleaning the gutters or something like that. Well, is that the same thing as if the roof starts leaking? Well, no, that's a repair. So what's maintenance, what's a repair, and who is responsible? And this is where it really pays to dig into your lease.
So Georgia law does not really address these issues, and that's where the lease. So you got to deal with all of this up front.
You really do, and this is one of the biggest reasons that leases have gotten so long. When I started back in the 1850s, we would have a that's funny, that's a joke, in the 1850s.
Oh, I thought you were serious. No.
Rent
was really cheap back then.
Rent was cheap back, so was real estate. We would have a lease literally on the front and back of one piece of paper. Today, we're approaching 18 pieces of paper because you've got federal forms, you have lead-based paint forms, disclosure forms. Everybody's making sure they protect themselves, but they're also spelling out who is responsible for what. And one of my concerns, Buck, is that a lot of tenants don't take the time to read their lease, and they really should, because if they don't, they're going to get themselves in trouble. And, you know, these leases can go 8 or 10 pages. And the question I get a lot is, do I really need to read every page? I say, no, you don't need to. But if you don't, you're not going to know what's going on.
Right.
And a year from now, you may be defending yourself in court. So
what's our bottom line here?
Well, the bottom line is this. If you aren't exactly sure what's covered in that lease agreement, hire a real estate attorney. It may cost you $100 now, save you a lot of money and heartache in the end.
Good advice as always. And John's going to be here after the show taking your questions on Facebook Live. And you can also find this segment on our website, fox5atlanta.com. John, thanks. 8:43.